let's welcome the Vice Dean of Research as well as concurrently the Associate Professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore, Dr. Eduardo Araral. Shall we give him a big round of applause, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Macron. Ambassador Li Peng, our friends in government, we have a well-represented group today from the Philippine Competition Commission, Department of Science and Technology, from the Senate, Department of Education, of course from the DICT. I apologize if I missed anyone in the government today. Our friends in the industry, we have representatives from Globe, PLDT, Huawei, and Microsoft. We have friends from civil society and from the academia. Deputy Director General Nguyen, welcome to the Philippines. And of course, last but not least, our friends from the media. Thank you for coming. This is our 7th project with Microsoft, the last 3 years or so. And many of you here, we have met and we have many conversations on this, and we keep on pushing the envelope. We see progress. So we are very thankful and happy that this kind of conversation is contributing to better understanding of or learning from each other. I was surprised to hear that Vietnam has 70,000 cell sites and we are only 20,000. So I hope Secretary Rio can build 50,000 in 1 year, hopefully, so that we can see him next year and we can hasten our broadband. For those of you not yet familiar with cloud computing is simply computing on the internet. So you do away with your servers and all the stuff, your legacy system. So you just operate on the internet. So cloud computing has many obvious benefits compared to the traditional computing. So savings is one. You're not stuck with legacy software. You don't need to update them every now and then because cloud computing is always available online. So it gives you a lot of savings, especially for small companies. It gives you competitive advantage. It gives you unlimited computing power because it's available online. It's flexible. It's pay as you use. You don't need to invest. If you use little, you pay little. If you use much, then you pay as proportionally. It gives you security. You don't have to worry watching over your hardware because somebody is watching it for you. So clearly, the benefits of cloud computing is very compelling. So the question is, if the benefits are clear, why are we not adopting it wholesale? That's a big question. Well, cloud computing has many benefits for governments. Obviously, we're still stuck with legacy systems, especially for cities. We did a study 2 years ago on smart cities or secondary cities, and we were surprised to see that many of our cities are still way behind in terms of the definition of ICT is just the mayor using smartphone. That's it. But they have no idea of what is benefits of cloud computing and so on and so forth. But we need to reach out to these city mayors as well. I mentioned small and medium enterprises. Those don't have money to put up upfront for capital investments. They will be a big beneficiary of cloud computing. Manufacturing and Internet of Things. You know, Southeast Asia is a manufacturing powerhouse. Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam. Philippines is not a manufacturing hub. But these countries benefit a lot through the Internet of Things. Internet of Things is simply putting digital devices in physical objects, and then they communicate with one another. Then they become smart. It's like cars talking to one another, your appliances talking with one another, your robots talking to one another, and it can bring about a lot of advantages to the manufacturing sector. Banks, especially small banks, would benefit a lot from cloud computing because they rely on data, security, protection, and so on and so forth. Financial inclusion. In ASEAN, there's about 438 million people who still don't have bank accounts. 438 million. We look at the case of Kenya, M-Pesa, 60% of the population have mobile bank accounts. A large part of their GDP is transacted through their mobile payment. If they can do it in Kenya, surely Myanmar, Vietnam, Philippines can do this. There's also $63 billion worth of remittances in Southeast Asia, mostly in the Philippines. 63 billion. If you can lower the cost of remittances, that will be a huge benefit to a lot of people. I know Filipinos send money through Globe, and then they cash, and then they go to Jollibee. If we can expand this, then especially for new countries that export label, Myanmar, Indonesia, Vietnam also, there will be huge benefit. Healthcare, we see this, but not yet there. Telemedicine, diagnostic, especially for big country like us or Indonesia, archipelago, telemedicine would play an important role, and cloud computing would be a key solution to this. And finally, of course, education. As an archipelago, we have thousands of islands, and we need to connect them. They're off-grid, and hopefully cloud computing, TV white space would solve the problem. Of course, we need to build 50,000 more cell sites to solve this problem. So, with that as a background, let me now discuss the Philippine case. I have about 10 minutes to describe to you. Of course, the Secretary has already told us what the problems are, and I agree with him 100%. This is the study that we did comparing the Philippines with Southeast Asia, and you can see the results in the handout. This is the good news. So in the last 5 years, the Philippines has made good progress. It's not all that bad that you would hear that we are the most expensive and we are the slowest. That's true, but we have also made progress in different directions. But we're not there yet. So this is a score compiled by the Cloud Computing Society, and they keep track of progress in different. This is the Cloud Readiness Index, and from 2012 to 2016, the Philippines registered one of the highest rate of progress. It's probably because we were at the bottom, so there's no way to go but up, or you're stuck or you get stuck at the bottom. But we made good progress in terms of broadband quality. The Secretary has mentioned this. We have free Wi-Fi in EDSA now. We have Department of Information and Communication Technology established last year. We have bills on telecommuting. We have bills on we have the law on privacy. There are bills being considered to revise the Utilities Act. So we are making progress. We are making traction. We did well in terms of privacy, and very strong privacy protection. But as they say, good progress, but not enough. We're still lagging behind. So this one gives you a snapshot of how we compare with ASEAN countries between 2002 and 2016. Of course, Singapore, as a small city-state, we have 7,100 islands. Singapore is just one very, very small island. Two islands. Sentosa. Yes, that's right. Ambassador corrected me. There are 2 islands. Actually 3. Pedro Barranca and others. Yes, that's right. So, we've made progress, but compared with other regions, they're still way ahead of us. We still have, unfortunately, I've shown this document to the Office of the President, so he will now be benchmarking the Secretary with how good are we compared with our neighbors now. So it's not just the number of cell sites, but he will be looking at all of this metrics maybe in a year's time. But that's good. The Secretary has already mentioned the big problem. We all know this. Compared to our region, this left-hand column here, or this left-hand bar here, is your megabits per second. Singapore is the highest, and then it goes down. Then there's the Philippines, we're the slowest. And then the round ones are your percentage of connections is above 4 megabits per second. This one. So again, we're still stuck there. The others are just doing well. So this is the big story. Okay. This is the value add of our report. This is the Philippines compared to ASEAN. When I first presented the study to Secretary Rio about in March, he said, your report is only valuable if you tell me 3 things: performance, price, access. That's all that matters to him. Right? I said, yes, sir. We will do a study on performance, price, and access. And then I came back with this report. So Philippines, Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand. This is affordability of fixed broadband. As you can see, we have one of the highest or most expensive fixed broadband. Indonesia is $21, but ours is 50. Singapore, because of size, it's 2.39. Vietnam, 1.8, very cheap. 1.8, very fast. Thanks to Director General. Maybe you can tell us later what is your secret or how you can bring your price to 1.84. Malaysia, 4.8, and then Thailand, 5.6. This data is publicly available in telegeography. You can check it out. And every year this data changes. Okay. Mobile, we have the highest cost for mobile, 6.4% of gross national income. Partly because we only have 20,000 cell sites. Right? Vietnam is 3.5%, Singapore very 0.31, so on. So we still have a ways to go. Broadband speed, the secretary said, if it's a fixed building, we have very strong speed, very high speed like the BPOs. And now EDSA. So at least when you're stuck in traffic in EDSA, you have free Wi-Fi and it's fast to compensate for your loss of time. Internet penetration, and this is what the secretary told us. We have 2 telco operators. Singapore has 3. Yes, Singapore has 3, and they're all government-owned, somewhat one way or another. Very strong government. The message here is the Philippines has 2 privately run telcos. The others, they have 3, 6, 8, 5, 5, and all government, very strong activist role. Either they build the website, they open the market like Myanmar or Cambodia and so on. Very activist role for the government. This is what the secretary is telling us. Imagine if our roads are all private, then it will be slow and expensive. So the government has to help build the website, build the cell sites, liberalize the sector, and do more. And of course, these are the how profitable the telcos are. Earnings before incomes, taxes, and so on. So our 2 telcos are very profitable. Singtel is 29%. Vietnam is no data. Malaysia 37%. The most profitable, of course, is Telkom in Indonesia. Okay, so this is what the secretary asked me to do. This is what I delivered to him. I gave it to the Office of the President and the Competition Commission. Then let them debate on this. So the data is available for everybody to check. But then, what should we do? I think the secretary has already mentioned, and he clearly knows what needs to be done. I don't need to repeat this. The House of Representatives already passed a bill. It's now sitting in the Senate to revise the Utilities Act, so such that we don't classify ICT as utilities anymore, and therefore we skip the constitutional restriction on the definition of utilities. We don't need to amend the Constitution for that. Then the public telecommunications policy is still 1995, haven't been touched for 20 years. We still need, and my friend here, Winston, has been pushing hard for the government to do more about this. And of course, changing the 1987 Constitution. I'm part of the PDP Laban Study Commission, and we just produced the draft Constitution that would also that recommends the liberalization of the economic provisions of the Constitution. Okay, so that's the long and short of it. Hopefully next year the secretary is still around. We know his heart is in the right place. He knows the problems, and we will help him. We're here to help him communicate the news to the Office of the President that he's doing a good job, and we just need to help him. This is a long slog, but of course, today we want to hear lessons from Vietnam, from Singapore, from Myanmar. What else can we do besides what are already mentioned here? So that is my presentation today. I now open the floor for, upfront, how many minutes? 10, 15 minutes. Okay.
First of all, shall we give Dr. Ed a big round of applause? So we're now opening the floor for your questions and clarifications about the reports. I'll just be going.
Just clarification. Hi, Dr. Ed. Just a quick question. Why did you decide to use EBITDA instead of net income? because depreciation expense is enormous for telcos, and then because you just have to keep investing.
Yeah, because we don't have data po on the net income. That's the only publicly available data that's available in Telejo.
EBITDA, I see, because that's an SEC. And these are audited companies, and you would find them in the SEC.
Yeah.
And I think you would have a more realistic impression of what the rate of returns is in the
Yeah.
business.
Maybe in our next round of report, we will look at the
SEC.
Yeah, not just in SEC, but our problem is with Vietnam, with Thailand. They don't have equivalent SECs that are
You mean these large companies do not have audited published reports?
the one in Vietnam, we cannot find them.
Uh,
So it's easier for us to.
I'll help you.
Yeah, okay, sige po. Thank you.
Any more questions from the audience, please? By the way, please introduce yourselves as well and your organization.
Good morning. Mary Grace Santos. I'm with the Internet Society and the Better Broadband Alliance. I'm also writing for Telecom Asia, and my recent blog post is I posted a question whether the government should be the third telco of the country, and you presented a very interesting matrix earlier where you show that in the Philippines there's no government investment in telecommunications, but in all other countries there is. And you said that their government is very strong, and I would assume that they have very strong institutions as well, if they are able to run their government telco properly. So my question is, do you think the government in the Philippines should be the third telco? And what do you think should be considered if the Philippines would decide whether to have a government-run and operated telco? Thank you.
Well, first, I don't believe in government-run telcos. We know they're always inefficient. Maybe government as investor, government as effective regulator, government as a builder of the backbone, government as facilitator, building cell sites. That's what I meant by activist government, not government building its own telco. And none of this. Oh, sorry. Oops. In the countries that I looked at, none of them are being run by governments, but they have activist governments, like building the 70,000 cell sites or opening up the market for competition, like in Myanmar. So 5 years ago, SIM card in Myanmar cost about $2,000. Today it's $5. Right? So that's what I meant. And plus, it's very expensive for the government to run it. The market, the telcos here can do much better than the government. But we want a more activist government to solve the problem and not just be a hands-off government. Thank you.
Questions still?
Good morning. Winthrop View Internet Society. Doc Ed, yung binanggit kanina ni Secretary Rio, no? There seems to be, because we're focusing a bit too much on the cell sites, which imply mobile connectivity. But the fact of the matter is, number one, the Philippines also lacks wireline connections, fiber optics, for example. So it's not just a matter of cell sites. Now, the BPO business, the BPO industry will benefit from these fiber optic, very large pipes going to their BPO offices. But what we need also for the rest of the country, for other sectors, for individuals, for educators, for doctors and all that, our fiber optics are landlines to other businesses, to other people. And currently, the Philippine speeds for wireline connections, now let's call it wireline, not landline, wireline connections, this has nothing to do with cell towers, are even slower than the mobile speeds. So this is something also that competition should address.
Right.
I'm Rohan Savarjiva from Learn Asia, a regional think tank. When I look at those numbers, I mean, there are two things that come out from that second to last column, which is that you have a duopoly. Pretty much nobody else has got a duopoly. And we know something about duopolies. The only thing worse than a monopoly is a duopoly. right? So when you put no and yes next to government ownership, the eye goes to that, saying that is the only relevant factor. When in fact it could be that you don't have enough players. That in fact what your problem is the lack of market entry. That's one point. Second is internet connectivity has to be seen in terms of a chain, and a chain is as strong as the weakest link. It's possible that, given what this gentleman from ISOC said, that your domestic backhaul is also monopolized. I don't know, I haven't studied it, but it's possible that those costs are high. And because of that, there's congestion and it is slowing down connectivity. That's one possibility. Second is that your international connectivity may be problematic. Maybe there is monopoly power in the cable stations. So I think that to focus only on these two things that have come up so far, which is the number of cell sites or BTS stations, and the fact that the government is not involved in the ownership, is somewhat misleading, because there are lots of other factors that one should look at.
Actually, this one is not ownership. This one's more the government role. It's not ownership. But I completely agree with you. This is what the secretary asked us to do. But of course, we can add, in the next iteration of this, we can update this, add more information into this, the backbone thing, what we told us to do. We can continue and define this study. Since you're, Ron, you're an expert in Myanmar. Now Myanmar has leapfrogged from no telephones to high-speed broadband. Maybe later on you can tell us, when we have presentation on Myanmar, you can tell us the details of what we can learn of what Myanmar did.
Hello, good morning. I'm Tonyo Cruz from Manila Bulletin. I'm also with a consumer group, Tex Power. Maybe another area of study that the professor could look into is an assessment of how the law that you referred to, RA 7925, has impacted telecommunications. It rolled out liberalization and deregulation policies, and the way it is being communicated here is that the market or the industry needs further liberalization and further deregulation. But we've been doing that for the past 20 years. The government has given the telcos the widest latitude. Actually, there should be another column about foreign ownership. It's not totally true that there's no foreign interests in the two telcos. And in the former telcos that have been gobbled up by the two telcos. For example, Globe has Singtel has interests in Globe, and NTT of Japan has interests in PLDT. But we don't know their contributions into upgrading the two companies, aside from investing money. So I think we should also take a good hard look at the impact of liberalization and regulation.
Sipo, thank you for this suggestion. If we can get data on that and we will update this report next time, we will fine tune it. I'll take all the suggestions from Mr. Romy, yourself, Vitrop, and the others, and then we will see how we can fine tune the report next time so we have a more fair and balanced picture.
Hi. How are you? Basically, no, hearing all of this, I guess the biggest thing that I would like you to look at is, I'm with Winston on the fact that I think a fiber backhaul is what's really holding up the ability of the government or anybody else to actually scale into the province. No? And maybe you should look at the government potentially owning that backbone, and looking at rolling it out in the provinces, having the provinces do it, the governors do it themselves, which they're actually willing to do, to actually make this very quick. Because the problem really right now is the number of cell towers, is minimal. Even if we create cell towers, again, we are going to spend money when in reality that money is going to be not spent properly, even if there's co-location, because as we know, radio systems give limited bandwidth. So they should look at owning the highway and then letting people hook up to that highway at any point in time. I think that would be the best.
Ang problema lang ng fiber backhauls archipelago is very difficult. Unlike Vietnam, there's no island. I mean, a few islands, but it's just one backbone. So it's different compared with us and Indonesia because we are an archipelago. It's very expensive.
Yeah, actually that's the problem of Indonesia also. That's why to a degree they're very expensive. They're a bigger archipelago than we are. But if you can connect at least the main
ones, yes.
the main ones, and then radio out to the other provinces that are islands.
We will take note of that suggestion. I think DICT is well aware of this fiber that called in the National Broadband Policy.
Maybe we'll give one more question and then later on we will have another round of Q&A as well, so we could proceed with the next country study.
Thank you, Dr. Ed. I'm Des Garcia from the Department of ICT. You mentioned regarding in your study that one of the areas that would have to be updated is the guidelines on the procurement of slots, orbital slots, and frequency registration of Philippine satellites. I understand, yes, I agree that this would have to be updated considering that the current guidelines is based on a circular that was issued by the Department of Transportation and Communications sometime 1990s. It's just that in the previous pages of the study, there was no mention regarding the satellites, etc. But then in the recommendation, it was mentioned that there has to be a revision of the guidelines. This is probably just for clarification of everyone. I understand that it has to be updated, but in relation to the previous pages, you might want to say something about it. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take note of that. Hopefully, we can do this report every 2-3 years and keep track of progress and fine-tune it. And hopefully, we'll still see Secretary Rio come back to us and see. We will monitor his progress as well.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Ed.
Thank you.
Shall we give Ed a big round of applause? Thank you. So for our second country study for this morning, let's welcome Dr. Ruben Ong, Assistant Professor of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore, and he will deliver a country study on Singapore. Please give him a big round of applause.
Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Magadang umaga po. Thank you. So this is my first time in the Philippines, and immediately my sentiment is Mahal kita Philippines. Okay, my name is Ruben Ng. People always have issues with my surname or family name or last name, as you want to call it, because it has no vowels. So people always think that NG is an abbreviation for no good. But I assure them, no, it's not no good, it's nice guy. So I'm a psychologist by training, but a very undisciplined psychologist because I've been applying psychology to many different fields, data science and recently cloud computing. So I'd like to share with you, and very excited to share with you some of key findings of the different case studies. Okay, this is the overview of the session for the Singapore case study today. First is looking at the key drivers of cloud computing adoption in Singapore. Secondly, 2 key applications, and thirdly, one take-home message. So I think to understand the adoption of cloud computing in Singapore, the first very primary initiative we need to understand is this smart city or smart nation initiative. So we are in Singapore, we are very purpose-driven and very vision-driven, headed out by our Prime Minister. So this is the Smart Nation Genesis, that's its vision that was unveiled on November 2014, about 3 years ago. Our vision is for Singapore to be a smart nation, a nation where people live meaningful and fulfilled lives, enabled seamlessly by technology, offering exciting opportunities for all. So notice that the Smart Nation drive or initiative is not really putting technology as a centerpiece, but putting people, Singapore and Singaporeans as a centerpiece. So that's the purpose that's driving the adoption of cloud computing in Singapore. So these are some materials to make the Smart Nation initiative as inclusive as possible, looking at the purpose, the vision, instead of just technology, urging people that smart is a nation that sparks countless possibilities, that everyone has possibilities from people to businesses. Smart is co-creating solutions with anyone for everyone. So this co-creation is very critical because it's really like sharing data. Data is unlike money, for example. Money, if I give you $1, I'm poorer by $1, you're richer by $1. But if I share data with you, I'm richer for the insights, you have the insights, together we are richer for the insights. So we are looking at co-creation, data sharing, to come up with innovative solutions for everyone. Well, one of the big I guess feedback about government is that policy making is really done in silos. So the rallying cry, the rallying cry sometimes is, you should really break down the silos. But having worked on a farm, if you have worked on a farm like I have, I would really caution against breaking down silos. All these silos in the farms are filled with cement, sand, and sawdust. If you break down the silos, it will be a big mess. So I would caution against breaking down silos, but I'll rather recommend building links between the silos. So this is what Singapore has done, looking at a fundamental shift in government. So one of the ways that we have tried to build links towards the silos is to set up these forums for policy making and decision making. So we have social forum where all the social agencies come together to build consensus and talk about social policies. We have economic forum and things like this. We also have a Smart Nation committee that brings together different sort of players within the Smart Nation space to talk about policies and bring consensus. So at the strategic level, these forums help to build consensus about policies and bring related parties together, which they may or may not be talking to each other. So that's the strategic level. The other strategic initiative also within the Prime Minister's office, we have set up this strategy group. So strategy group looks at whole of government policy making. Issues these days like Singapore facing an aging population, it's not just a health issue, it's not just a social issue, it's also a transport issue, which requires whole of government coordination and policy making. So at a strategic level, the strategy group is being set up within the Prime Minister's office to coordinate things like this. Even at the tactical level, we are looking at whole of government sort of initiatives as well. A couple of years ago, the MSO, or the Municipal Services Office, was set up to coordinate feedback, complaints and things like this about what people see. If there's a certain complaint, they may send to a certain ministry, but sometimes that may not be the relevant ministry. So this MSO is set up to coordinate at the back end, responding to all these citizens' feedback on the ground. So one of the key drivers of the adoption of cloud computing is really looking at whole of government initiatives both at the strategic and the tactical level. The other key driver is really leveraging research and development funding for innovation. So in 2015, Singapore set aside 19 billion Singapore dollars, that's about maybe 13.5 billion US dollars for R&D. And the difference in this tranche of R&D funding to be spent by 2020 is this emphasis on looking at the entire chain of innovation. In the past, when we spend money on R&D, we typically give it to universities, and universities, the KPIs, or the key performance index, really is publications and patents. But I would argue that publications and patents are not innovations because it doesn't lead to innovative solutions that make a difference to you and I on the ground. So what is critical about this tranche of funding, the 19 billion Singapore dollars, is to look at collaborations between government and industry so that prototypes can be scaled up and implemented. So we are not only funding the R&D, but we are funding that implementation science, that implementation gap, and also the translation of technology into innovative solutions. So that's also that collaboration is driving the adoption of cloud computing. So this is one of my favorite quotes. When it comes to innovation, an ounce of execution is worth more than a ton of theory. So essentially, these concepts have to leap out of papers and concepts and patents to move along the value chain from theory into practice. Okay, against the background of the key drivers of cloud computing, I'd like to share with you some key applications of cloud computing. So the great irony about economics is that we are good at forecasting the economy, but not so good at nowcasting the economy. So what do I mean by that? So we use data that is maybe 2 or 3 months or the last quarter to sort of forecast how the economy is going to do in the next quarter. But if you ask us how the economy is doing now, we only have anecdotal information. We don't really have a dynamic sense of how the pulse of society is doing. To know this is important because if I know that the economy is not going to do well in a week's time or in 2 weeks' time, then maybe I can consider micro stimulus to be let out in the economy. So what this ongoing project in Singapore is doing is to try to put together different indicators, dynamic indicators to help understand real time how the economy is doing. It could include factors such as movement within the ports. It could be how much rubbish is being thrown, things like this that forms a sort of a cocktail of variables that understand dynamically how the economy is doing. So that with this kind of applications, we can really nowcast the economy to supplement our understanding when we forecast the economy. And all these things leverages on cloud computing. Okay, the other exciting project I'd like to share with you is headed by the LKY School of Public Policy. So one of the key issues that we are seeing is the relatively high unemployment among professionals, managers, and executives. So the unemployment rate has been slightly higher than the national average for a very long time, 10 to 15 years. And we thought that one of the key drivers for this is the mismatch between skills, jobs, and expectations. So I may be very skilled, I'm retrenched or laid off from the oil and gas industry, but I do not have the adequate skill sets to enter a new emerging industry like cybersecurity. By the time I'm skilled up, the tenure of the industry may have changed, or maybe the salary doesn't meet my expectation, or I don't really like to work in a cyber bunker. So we thought that one of the key drivers for the relatively higher unemployment rate among older professionals is this mismatch between skills, jobs, and expectations. So the current state is this. So governments around the world will sometimes tell people in their countries that, oh, the economy is really not doing well, you need to skill up. But the reality is, people want to skill up, but there's this information gap. What skills do I pick up? Okay? So the ideal state here that Singapore is trying to move towards is to build a skills map of jobs. So for example, within different sectors, within different jobs, what's the map of skills that are available, that are required for different jobs today and tomorrow? But the LKY School is going one step further. We think that knowing the skills map is not enough. We need to know what's the supply and demand of skills. Because if I know what skills are high in demand, low in supply, then I can skill up professionally. So a couple of years ago, Singapore introduced this Skills Future Credit for citizens and PRs. $500 skills credit to pick up professional skills, to skill up professionally. But at this point of time, when we looked at the data, the top skills that are being used using this Skills Future Credit is flower arrangement and Korean. So while it's interesting skills, but it's not as it was intended professional skills. So it's all a work in progress. So imagine if we can display later, I'll show you a chart of what I mean. If we can display, if we can analyze and say for different jobs in different sectors, what skills are high in demand, low in supply, people can use it to skill up professionally. And it will also be interesting because it will be used to analyze jobs adjacency too. If I'm laid off from this industry, I want to move to another industry, which is the nearest or most adjacent industry to me with the least pain for upskilling? Or even if I want to change jobs or change sectors, which is the nearest job or occupation or even sector to me? So this project tries to do this. So this is what we envision. If we can do this supply and demand chart for different industries, this would be really fantastic. So as you can see here, the x-axis is supply. So if you go further right of the x-axis here is higher supply. This is the y-axis. Higher up the y-axis is higher demand. So this is very useful because if I'm a data scientist, it will be very useful to know that these are the skills like Hadoop and things like this. These are the skills that are high in demand, low in supply. I will skill up professionally in this area and not these other skills here. Okay, imagine if we can do this and let this information out to everyone, this will become a very powerful, individuals will be empowered to scale up professionally. So this ongoing memorandum of understanding is a collaboration between policy owners in Singapore, technology partners, which Microsoft is on board as well, and also LinkedIn, because LinkedIn has a very rich data source for jobs, who's moving to where. So we're trying to link up insights from the private sector and also government data to give us this kind of perspective. And the other important partner within this memorandum of understanding is also the implementers, people who are going to put out causes, education, what causes can we put out proactively to help society skill up professionally. And the team at the LKY School of Public Policy is heading the sense making. So this is a very exciting project that has social good as well as adopts cloud computing. The other very important point, as I alluded to just now, is this concept of open data. Data, as I mentioned, has a multiplier effect. So if we can co-innovate on solutions, we are richer for the insights and solutions. Finally, I just want to leave you with one take-home message. And that take-home message really is to focus on the art of cloud computing. There's a lot of discussion about technology, about the science of it, what should you adopt, and where are you at the maturity curve. But I think the important, sometimes under-noticed concepts are really art of cloud computing, the perceptions, maybe the negative perceptions, the implementation. So this is what I mean by the art of cloud computing. We have to get this right. If not, we won't be able to lead to a full adoption in society. So let me just give you, let me just tell you a quick story about this. So so in the past, I used to do analytics consulting. So 60% of my clients were government, the rest were private sector. So this was a public sector client leveraging cloud computing. So we realized and we came up with some algorithms. So this algorithm says that if we optimize 4 items in the inventory of this particular agency, it could save the agency $250,000 a month. Okay, optimize meaning that when should the goods come in, how long should be kept, when should it leave the organization. Okay, so from a science perspective, it's great, right? Because we are saving this particular agency $250,000 a month, but it wasn't implemented. Okay, so I also went to find out why, because I was the project director. So I realized that the program manager on the other side got cold feet, because if he implements this, he goes to his boss to say, hey, look, if I implement this, the company will save $250,000 every month. Then the boss will ask him, for the past 2 years on your job, what have you been doing? You've been losing the company $250,000 every month. So as you can see here, we got the science right, but we ignored the art. It didn't turn out good. Okay? So I think it's very critical to focus on, to get stakeholders together, to focus on not just the science, but also how you're going to implement some of these things. To look at the entire value chain from idea to implementation. I think that's very critical. If we can get that right, I think cloud computing adoption will be very prolific in any society. Okay, with that, thank you very much. Selamat po.
Okay, so do you have any questions?